Hear now the word of the Lord. Early in the morning, on the first day of the week, while it was dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. She ran to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord from the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." Peter and the other disciple left to go see it. They were running together, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter, and he was the first to arrive at the tomb. And bending down to take a look, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he didn't go in. Following him, Simon Peter entered the tomb and saw the linen cloths lying there. He also saw the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head, and it wasn't with the other clothes. Then the other disciple, the one who arrived at the tomb first, went inside, and he saw and he believed. And they didn't yet understand the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to the place where they were staying. And Mary stood outside the tomb crying. She cried, she bent down to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels dressed in white, seated where the body of Jesus had been, one at the head and one at the foot. The angels asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" And she replied, "They have taken away my Lord. I don't know where they put him." As soon as she said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she didn't know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" Thinking that he was the gardener, she replied, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said to her, "Don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to my Father. Go to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I'm going to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And Mary Magdalene left and announced to the disciples, "I've seen the Lord." The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. If you'll look under where it says sermon, you'll see this verse right here that I put there. "For we did not follow cleverly devised myths or stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty." So that is what some people back in the first century, that is what they believed about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. They believed it was a made-up, cleverly devised story. Surely, many people today believe that too, that it is a cleverly devised, cleverly made-up story. Surely no modern mind can truly believe that a man who was tortured and killed on a cross, laid in an airtight tomb with a massive stone covering it, could walk out of it 3 days dead. No one here has witnessed anything like it. No one you know has witnessed anything like it. We're pretty sure no one on earth has witnessed anything like it, or we probably know about it. But that fact alone, that mere fact alone, makes the resurrection of Christ sound exactly like a cleverly devised story. People don't rise from the dead after being dead in the grave for 3 days. It just doesn't happen. So look, put yourself in the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, pick one of them. Imagine you are them. And so you're in the first century, and you are going to write a story to try to convince people Jesus rose from the dead. That's your job. Now, if you were going to do that back in their time, you would do it differently than they did. Why do I say that? Because in every single gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first eyewitnesses were women. Women. If you were a gospel writer back then, you would not use women as your first eyewitnesses. And the first person mentioned in the story of the empty tomb in every gospel is Mary Magdalene. So if you're a gospel writer back then and you're writing a story to try to convince people of the resurrection, Mary Magdalene would not be your star witness. She would not. And in fact, it's a shame, but no woman would. In the first century, women were not even eligible to testify in a court of law. They were not trusted enough in the first century to get the story right. They couldn't even testify in a court of law, even if they were eyewitnesses to the crime. They could not be trusted enough to get the story right to testify. I don't know if you've ever heard of the historian Josephus. He was a first century Jewish historian. A lot of what we know about that time comes from him. And this is what he wrote about women and their testimonies. You're going to be offended. Let not the testimony of women be admitted in a court of law on account of the levity and boldness of their sex, since it is probable that they may not speak the truth. So according to Josephus, there were three criteria to testify in a court of law. The first one is you needed 3 witnesses, but at least 2. The second one is that all the witnesses must be people of good character. And the third one, no women can testify because they aren't serious people and they likely won't tell the truth. Back then. There's another first century writer, his name is Strabo, and he said you cannot convince a group of women of anything using reason because they're like an unrestrained mob. Hoo boy. Women are getting agitated right now. I didn't say it. Don't believe it. But it gets worse. It gets worse. Even the disciples. It says in Luke, the women's account of the resurrection struck the apostles as nonsense and they didn't believe the women. That sounds pretty tame compared to the rest of the ones. But the Greek word for nonsense is leros. And it was used to describe the ranting and raving of a person suffering from delirium. So not only did the disciples just think the women were talking nonsense, they thought it was crazy talk. Even the apostles didn't trust the testimony of these women at first. I did not relish telling you about these awful perspectives about women back in the first century. It was rather uncomfortable, honestly. Saw some of you looking at me like, we need to move this guy on to the next appointment. But I hope you see my point. No serious writer of a cleverly devised story is going to convince the first century world that an actual resurrection happened with women at the forefront of their testimony. Hardly anyone at that time would take it seriously. The gospel writers would have been sabotaging their story. And to make matters worse, your star witness wouldn't be Mary Magdalene. One of the earliest opponents of Christianity, his name was Celsus, a Greek philosopher. He wrote a book called The True Word. And in that book, he said, the resurrection cannot be true because Mary Magdalene, a hysterical woman, was its star witness, its first witness. Now, the last we left Mary Magdalene was a couple of weeks ago. If you were here, you remember. She was taking a bottle of perfume worth 300 days' wages. 300 days' wages. She took a bottle of perfume. She poured it all over Jesus' feet. Almost a year's salary. And to up the madness of it all, she stooped down and she wiped his feet with her hair. And you remember how Judas responded, right? This is insanity. Do you know who Mary Magdalene was? She was at one time a mental patient. In Luke chapter 8, it says, of all the women who were traveling with Jesus, many of them had been cured of evil spirits, and one of them was Mary Magdalene, from whom 7 demons came out. She was called a demoniac, which is an ancient way of saying she was mentally ill. The demoniac in Mark's gospel was wandering around yelling. No one could contain him. He was so insane that he found the strength to break the chains that bound him. He was cutting himself with stones and babbling nonsense. The demoniac in Mark is the kind of sick person that hospitals used to put in straitjackets. Mary was one of those. She was really sick. So consider this. Jesus Christ chooses as his star witness a recovering mental patient who happened to be a woman. And I repeat, this is not how you convince a first century world that you've risen from the dead. But Jesus clearly wasn't interested in what the first century world would find believable. He's not even interested in what the modern world finds believable. He was interested in turning what the world believes upside down. He chose an outcast to be his first messenger. He chose someone that the rest of the world would write off. Someone the modern world even would write off. You can't make this stuff up. And that's exactly my point. If Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were making this story up to prove the resurrection, then they were doing a poor job by those standards in the first century. All across the world today, churches are full. There are a variety of types of people in churches today. You have those who are sitting in churches today who really believe in the resurrection of Jesus and they practice it. You have some people sitting in churches today who believe in the resurrection, but their faith habits don't really reflect it, which makes me wonder if they really do believe it. But there are also people sitting in churches on this day who find they just don't believe in the resurrection. That's okay. Maybe they're in church because that's what the family does on Easter Sunday. Dutiful, if not believing, and that's a good thing. That's a real good thing. It's certainly better than saying you believe in the resurrection, but it's not reflected in your life. And maybe what I've said so far doesn't really convince any modern doubter sitting with their families in the pew this morning. Maybe none of that convinces you. Maybe you're not convinced. That's fine. But it should at least get your attention. No? It should at least get your attention. And here's the thing. In the church, we often say that believing in the resurrection is a matter of faith. Well, it is a matter of faith. We weren't eyewitnesses. We have to trust the other eyewitnesses. Believing the resurrection is indeed a matter of faith, but it's not without evidence. Why would Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John make up a story that way? And if I have offered today a compelling case that the gospel writers would not have made up that story, then you should be at least intrigued with one more piece of evidence. Consider this piece of evidence. In fact, even if you don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus, you can't deny what I'm about to say next. Those gospel writers and those early followers of Jesus, they were radically and unalterably changed by what they witnessed. They were so changed by what they saw, they began preaching the resurrection to a crowd that would soon kill them for it, and eventually did. They saw what happened to Jesus after he preached the good news, and now they're doing the exact same thing Jesus was doing. They got him tortured and killed. They were radically changed by what they witnessed. You don't risk your life like that for some cleverly devised story. You don't. You have to be so changed by that event, you can't not risk your life for it. Why would so many followers of Jesus risk their life for something most of the world thinks nonsense? Clearly they witnessed something. Stephen was stoned to death for being a resurrection preacher, and standing there encouraging it all was a man named Saul who wanted to eliminate all of the resurrection preachers. And this was several years after Jesus died. Usually cults die out after their leader dies, but this one's still going strong years later. And these resurrection people were just continuing to preach, and it just irked Saul. And so he worked tirelessly to round them up and bring them to trial in Jerusalem. And as he was traveling to Damascus to round up more of these resurrection preachers, something happened. And it changed his life forever. And he tells us he saw the resurrected Jesus. The resurrected Jesus spoke to him. And when he did, Saul became Paul. He was so radically changed by seeing the resurrected Jesus that even his name changed. And with this new name, he began traveling all over his world, starting churches, preaching the resurrection of Jesus, often from prison. And eventually it got him beheaded. And because of Paul and because of all these resurrection preachers, now there are over 2 billion Christians in the world today, many of them sitting in a church in the pews somewhere on this day, 2,000 years later. And the largest charitable organization in the world today is the church. Something happened on that Sunday in Jerusalem. Something happened. And the first one to see it all, and the first one to tell others, was Mary Magdalene, a former mental patient of no account. How great is our God? Our God doesn't care about your status. Our God doesn't care about your past. Our God lifts up the lowly in this world and gives them a voice. I'm not going to do what I do for a living. I'm not going to stand up here every Sunday for some cleverly devised story. I am standing here because there is enough evidence to believe that Jesus Christ really rose from the dead, and that changes everything. We are all Mary Magdalene now. We are all Mary Magdalene, forgiven of our sin, healed by his love, redeemed by his grace, and eyewitnesses to the power of his resurrection. We are the same resurrection people those first century philosophers tried to dismiss. We are the same resurrection people who Saul persecuted. We are the same resurrection people who the Romans tried to exterminate. We are the same resurrection people who are still to this day being persecuted and killed in other countries in this world. We are those same resurrection people sitting here in this church on this day of resurrection, and the whole world is talking about it 2 millennia later. We are the evidence. And my question for you today is this. Are you just going to walk out of here this morning, go have Easter dinner, and act like nothing has changed? Or will you walk out of here and, like Mary Magdalene, be that change? Let us take a moment of silence.